has not started yet. Re-enter your access code or meeting number, followed by pound. Your entry is not valid, or the meeting is not started yet. Re-enter your access code or meeting number, followed by pound. Followed by pound. If you do not know your
Todd Everett and Katie Gunther with the Legislative Services and Legislative Fiscal Divisions. Representative Beatty, are you there?
Representative Dave. Yeah, this is Representative Dave Beatty. I'll give it 2 more minutes before I call the meeting to order, just to, in case there are other people to call in.
Representative Beatty, we know that Senator McClafferty and Representative Anderson are having difficulty getting into the system at this point.
Okay, if you keep me abreast of that.
Representative Beatty.
I just received a call from Representative Jones, and he says that he's trying to call in. He's getting a busy signal. I told him to continue trying.
Yeah, and I got a text from him too, and I'm replying. What I'm suggesting is people keep trying and tune into the audio stream. If they can't get in,
has joined the meeting.
And continue trying. And if folks have questions, if they can't get into the call and legislators have questions, reply all to the email I sent you with the call-in information, and we will communicate that.
Pat, is there a problem here possibly with bandwidth or with a limit on the number of people that can get on the call?
This is Pat again, Representative Beatty. We had a notice from state ITSD that CenturyLink has an issue. There's just issues with phones all over the state. So.
Okay, thank you. Just in case there is an issue with the number of callers that we can get in that may be complicating things, I would ask that if you're not a member of the staff,
has left the meeting.
If you're not a member of the staff or a member of either the Education Interim Committee or the Legislative Finance Committee, Subcommittee on Education, that you just follow this on audio so that we don't potentially clog up the access here.
Chair Beatty, this is Moffy. I was just wondering, is the government not allowed to use things like Google Hangouts or Zoom that have a greater capacity, maybe?
Representative Funk, I would have to refer that question to IT folks. Ask that if you're not
Fred Anderson
has joined the meeting.
Representative Beatty, this is Pat. We're wondering about just go ahead and starting and calling roll so we can get a list of who's on and who's not, and we may be able to dial individuals in on cell phones and put them on speaker. We'll give that a try. But Representative Anderson just got through, so please keep trying to get in. And we really should only have committee members and presenters on the line.
Very good. So I'm going to call this joint meeting of the Education Interim Committee and the LFC's Subcommittee on Education to order. And would the clerk please take the roll?
Representative Anderson.
Here.
Representative Funk.
Here.
Representative Grubbs.
here.
Representative Keel.
Here.
Representative Vinton.
Here.
Representative Woods. Senator Boland.
Here.
Senator McClafferty. Senator Solomon.
Here.
Senator Temple.
Yes.
Representative Beatty.
Here.
Representative Jones.
Here. Representative Wood. Senator Boland.
Lou Jones.
Has joined the meeting.
Here.
Representative Jones?
Has joined the meeting.
Yes, I just got here. This is Luke Jones. I just got here.
Thank you very much. Representative Hamlet? Senator Ellis?
Here.
Senator McClafferty?
All right, this is
Okay.
Sorry, Representative Beatty, you can proceed.
if I could ask. Yes, if I could ask the clerk to just state which committee members are not on the call as of right now.
As of right now, Representative Woods and Representative Hamlet.
Thank you. Proceeding, Pat, I'd like you just to give us an overview of how we're going to conduct this meeting, protocols, please.
Sure. Chair Beatty, this is Pat. I emailed you all last night about some tips.
Senator McClafferty.
Welcome, Senator McClafferty. So a few tips to make the call run smoothly. Please keep your phones on mute unless you are speaking. When you do speak, please do not use speaker. We find that we get much better sound quality if you hold the phone up to your face. We'll have a variety of presenters from OCHI and as well as the Office of Public Instruction this morning talking about specific updates, and we'll hold questions until each presenter is finished, and then Representative Beatty will call for questions. Please address questions through the chair and identify yourself so we know who's asking the question, and wait to be recognized by the chair. Thanks for being here this morning. Thanks to all our presenters. Back to you, Representative Beatty.
Thank you, Pat. First up on the agenda is Mr. Todd Everts, who's going to give us an overview of the emergency declaration and the governor's powers. Mr. Everts.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Education Interim Committee and the LFC Education Subcommittee, this is Todd Everts, your Chief Legal Counsel for the Legislature. I'll try to be brief. The governor has issued a couple of executive orders and some directives. On March 12th, Executive Order 2-2020 was issued in terms of emergency declaration, and then on March 13th, when the President of the United States declared a national emergency, the governor issued Executive Order 3-2020, which amended his original executive order to include the national declaration. On March 15th, the governor issued a directive closing schools. On March 19th, a directive providing additional guidance to schools. And then on March 26th, the governor issued a directive for stay-at-home orders. So the legislature over time has delegated a great deal of authority and flexibility to the executive branch in order to allow the state of Montana to respond to emergencies and disasters in a timely and effective manner. An emergency is defined under state statute as an imminent threat which includes an outbreak of disease that causes immediate peril to life or property, and that timely action can avert or minimize. The statutes authorize the governor to suspend the provisions of any regulatory statute prescribing procedures for conduct of state business or orders or rules of any state agency if strict compliance with the provisions of any statute, order, or rule would in any way prevent, hinder, delay necessary action in coping with the emergency disaster. The governor can also direct and compel evacuation of all or part of the population from an emergency or disaster area within the state if the governor considers the action necessary for the preservation of life or other disaster mitigation, response, or recovery. The governor also has the power to control ingress and egress to and from an incident or emergency or disaster area, and the movement of persons within the area and the occupancy of premises in the area. Once an emergency is declared, the governor is authorized to incur liabilities and expenses from the general fund. A declaration of emergency allows the governor to access the general fund through statutory appropriation of up to $16 million in the biennium. Given that the federal government has declared a national state of emergency and has offered up funds and materials and supplies, the governor may accept that offer, and any funds that are received for the purposes of addressing an emergency are statutorily appropriated in statute to be used. The Department of Public Health and Human Services also has broad authority to prevent and quarantine and create isolation and quarantine measures, treatment, screening, testing, a whole host of other abilities. So how long does an emergency declaration or order last? So there's two parts. An emergency may not continue longer than 30 days unless continuing the conditions of the state emergency exists, which must be determined by a declaration of emergency by the President of the United States or a declaration by the legislature through joint resolution. So as long as there's a declaration of emergency by the President of the United States, the state of emergency will continue to last past that 30-day timeline. There's also a provision on declaration of disaster, which can also last for 45 days. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committees, that's just a brief overview. Again, the emergency provisions under the statutes and also the Constitution provide the executive branch with broad authority to address the current emergency situation.
Are there any questions for Todd from the committee? Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item of the agenda, which is an update from the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education. Before we start that, I'd just like to let you know that Chair Anderson and I discussed the need for a meeting of this nature, and felt that it was necessary for us as legislators, in order for us to provide appropriate oversight, to have an informational briefing and perhaps have some more in the future, with a particular eye towards what are potential policy ramifications and fiscal impacts that might occur. I would remind everyone that this is an informational meeting only. No actions will be taken. And with that, I'll turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Brock Tessman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Brock Tessman, Deputy Commissioner for Academic Research and Student Affairs with the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education. I'll keep my comments very brief here today. I'm here with my colleague, Deputy Commissioner Tyler Trevor. My focus will be on the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on campus and student life. Happy to answer any questions afterwards. The rest of my arguments here are that we have about 45,000 students and about 8,000 employees around the state of Montana adjusting quite rapidly to this unprecedented challenge. At the system level, Many of our pieces of policy guidance have been offered through a series of commissioner directives and memoranda. I will talk to you primarily about guidance offered through two memos, one on March 12th and one on March 18th. On March 12th, we announced that the Montana University system would be moving to remote delivery as of March 23rd. And I use the term remote delivery intentionally. Not all remote delivery uses online technology. We have conference call technology. We have some faculty recording lectures and distributing in other ways. But remote delivery is more or less the mode of instruction now across the Montana University system. It seems to be working fairly well from daily updates from our chief academic officers on all of our campuses. We do, I would note, have some very rare exceptions to the remote delivery rule. In some cases, for specific career and technical education coursework, there is a remaining hands-on component being conducted. In these instances, we're following all established safety protocols, social distancing, enhanced cleaning procedures, and in many cases, we're also trying to accelerate those hands-on portions so that we can get students out of those face-to-face interactions and have them complete the course through remote delivery. Just another note or two on academic life and how this is working for students and faculty. We've moved to a pass-fail option for many of our campuses. Some of our campuses are still customizing the policy that will suit them best, but this is meant to serve students during what is really an unprecedented learning challenge. Our focus is on quality, of course, and on student support. You can imagine students have had to make quite an adjustment now learning primarily through their laptops and other technological devices. So we're doing our best to offer advising, counseling, social interaction in order to make sure our students stay engaged and continue to learn. I would note one very creative solution in our system. The Montana State University Billings has partnered locally with City Brew in order to offer wireless access to students who might want to drive and park in the parking lot there and access the Wi-Fi through City Brew if they can't make it to the MSUB campus and access Wi-Fi there. The second part of my comments really have to do with limiting student presence on campuses. Shortly before the end of spring break for most of our campuses, the commissioner issued a memo asking students who are on spring break to strongly consider another option for living and learning. In other words, to stay away from campus. And we've had, I think, a very significant response to that request. Our campuses have certainly partnered with us in that request. And the result is that we have a much smaller number of students currently present on our campuses. This makes it much easier to serve those students effectively and efficiently with a core set of employees rather than the full set of student services we would normally offer. Now, I would note that for a small number of our students, campus truly is home. They do not have another living arrangement that is viable for them. And so it's important to note that we continue to serve those students and support them, but just through a very streamlined model. Dining services have moved to grab-and-go models. Gyms, libraries, campus events, all of those have been greatly curtailed or closed outright. And for those students that remain and the core services employees that remain to serve them, we are taking great care, again, to maintain social distancing, to focus on cleanliness, any protective gear that may be necessary for the employees that remain on campus. We are multiple times a day in contact with all of our campuses and certainly adjusting as we go along. Our primary concern, of course, is safety of our students, our employees, and surrounding communities. And not unimportant is, of course, our commitment to academic quality. So we are focusing on maintenance of quality, work with our accrediting bodies, focusing on student retention, making sure that we're keeping students engaged, and also questions of equity. We want to make sure that we're not leaving certain groups of students behind as we adapt to this new reality. I'll stop there and turn it over to my colleague, Tyler Trevor, and happy to answer questions after Deputy Commissioner Trevor is finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tyler Trevor here, Deputy Commissioner, Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education. Members of the committee, good morning. I'll be brief. I provided a document that outlines some of the fiscal impacts to the Montana University system. We group these impacts into short-term and long-term categories. As you can see, the impacts range from the immediate cost of refunding room and board to students, as well as costs related to increased online presence, both through instruction and student support services, and costs related to the lack of or refraining from a variety of sales and services. It's really surprising, the magnitude in which the university interacts with the community and the number of performances that have been canceled, community events, sporting events, all kinds of revenue-generating offerings that have been greatly reduced, if not completely eliminated. And then if you look into the future, really what it's about is enrollment. And the projections here are very, very preliminary and ongoing at best. We look at some reductions if they occurred in non-resident students, which some models might suggest. Reductions to non-resident student revenue would be very impactful for the university system. This list was used to guide our congressional delegation and national organizations in the development of a federal stimulus package, and that's where I want to turn to. We just recently, as you all know, have received information about the stimulus package. The Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act provides $14 billion for education stabilization across higher education in the nation. $26 million of that will come to the Montana University system. This is a formula-based disbursement to institutions based on the total number of FTE as well as Pell Grant recipients, so i.e. low-income students. Those funds come to individual institutions and are allocated directly to the institutions, or at least line item to each institution. The funds would be split into two categories, and 50% at a minimum must go to the student emergency funds. And those funds are for financial aid to students for expenses related to the disruption of campus operations. So there are expenses that would go towards the total cost of attendance for students, as well as other items such as food, housing, course materials, technology, healthcare, etc. The second half of the funds are for institutions, and those funds are to defray expenses related to lost revenue, also technology costs, and the requirements associated with transferring more instruction to distance education. So that's the bulk of what we know, at least at this moment, about the stimulus funds. There's other provisions in the bill that relate directly to financial aid. They're largely regulatory guidance and relaxing of some of the rules and regulations related to federal funds for SEOG. That's supplemental education opportunity grants that go to students, to make those a little bit more flexible and emergency-oriented. Some relaxing of the federal work study funds, which allow you to carry over dollars into the following year, as well as if students cannot complete a semester, loans and Pell Grants, the allowable amount an institution has the ability to award, and student satisfactory academic progress is also not measured. So, Mr. Chair, I would stop and pause there to see if there are any questions. As Deputy Commissioner Tessman alluded to, we stand ready to answer anything that we can. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Representative.
Yes, thank you. Representative Gross.
Mr. Chair, a question for Mr. Trevor. At MSU Bozeman, we've built a new dining hall and several new dorms in the last probably 4 or 5 years. There's one just being completed. And those are supported by revenue bonds based on students from the board and using those facilities. Can any of those federal funds be used to make those bond payments?
Mr. Chair, Representative Grubbs, we're still looking into that. We don't have a lot of guidance at this moment down into the granular level. I would assume so. And that is obviously a very strong point of attention for us. And we're going to cover our bond payments. That's for sure. And if we could use the federal funds, we will.
Are there other questions for Mr. Trevor or Mr.
Mr. Chair Moffitt.
Yes, Representative Funk. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This probably is for Mr. Tessman, but whoever. I was just wondering, the students that remain on campus, what percentage or approximately how many throughout, and how are you looking at what might be needed over the summer for housing and support for these students who either can't or don't have another place to go? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, Representative Funk, thank you for that question. I have asked all of our student affairs officers and residential life directors actually to take a census as of today to figure out exactly how many students have decided to remain on campuses. I can tell you right now we have some initial numbers coming in, and it's as low as a couple dozen to a number in the low 100s. And, of course, a lot of that depends on the size of the campus that we're talking about. But we've seen the vast majority of students on all of our campuses move to another location. Some of our campuses that offer more robust summer programming have actually chosen to offer most of that programming, again, via remote delivery, just out of, I guess, a conservative approach to how COVID-19 might play out. We generally have a much, much lower proportion of students living on campus during the summer anyhow. I imagine the number will be small enough for campuses to work with those students on a case-by-case basis. Our goal, of course, is to limit student presence as much as possible, because in turn, that allows us to limit much of our employee presence, and it creates a safer environment for both categories, students and employees. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, this is Sue Benton.
Representative Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For Deputy Commissioner Trevor, the $26 million to Montana institutions that you referenced, can you clarify if that is in addition to the $1.5 billion minimum that is contained in the bill that is currently before Congress, or is it part of it, or is it in addition to? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Representative Benton, I'm not absolutely positive, but I can tell you it is in addition to the $3 billion that is given to states for state flexibility funding, and that funding goes directly to the governor, provided to the governor through flexible formula funding to be allocated to states based on the needs of elementary and secondary schools and the institutions of higher education. So the $26 million I believe, is in addition to that, and it goes directly to institutions, and they are named essentially. I don't know if they're named in the bill, but we have spreadsheets with dollar amounts attached to each institution. Mr. Chair.
Are there other questions? Are there any other questions for our deputy commissioners?
Yeah,
very well. Thank you very much.
Senator Solomon.
Senator Solomon.
Thank you. The question, I'm kind of looking down the road just a little bit, and you mentioned that the summer programs are in, it looks like you'll do them online. Does that work well for the students that want to come back in a sense? And also, I know a lot of teachers go back for working on more degrees and getting their credits and all that. Does that look like all that can be accomplished?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Senator Solomon, I don't think we'll have a blanket policy during the summer. In fact, I can think of one example right now. We've had to suspend some clinical coursework for students because the face-to-face interaction is not feasible right now. The hope is to actually bring some of those students back for a summer session and have them complete the face-to-face work if conditions allow. The vast majority of courses that could, for lack of a better term, sort of swing either way are now being moved to a remote delivery model just out of a kind of conservative approach to the situation. But you're absolutely correct. There will be some instances in which, conditions allowing, we will actually bring students back in order to complete some face-to-face coursework.
Okay. Chairman, can I ask another one, please?
Yes. Senator Solomon, go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, the next thing's a little bit on recruiting. You talked a little bit about it, the recruiting in the sense of the students. Do they seem to have the same, I guess you'd call it, number of applications to various parts of the system? Or has it really cut off as students don't know what they're going to do? And also, have they had any issues where the question of their graduation because of the issues of finishing high school, not being there, et cetera, are we able to work through those so we can continue on into the fall, hopefully as easily as possible?
Mr. Chair, Senator Solomon, I'll take the first stab at an answer, and perhaps Deputy Commissioner Trevor will follow up. I think it's a bit premature to look at any changes in recruitment numbers or application numbers right now on our campuses. I'm sure that's a bit of a lag effect that we'll have to detect down the road. Purely speculation, I would imagine that this will have some impact on, at the very least, the timing of college applications. Students and their families have lots of other pressing issues to deal with right now, and the fact of the matter is it's prime application season. So we have a close eye on that, and certainly nationally, we could expect for there to be shifting enrollment trends because of COVID-19. And again, all speculation, but you could imagine there could be changes in the pattern of students choosing to travel out of state or even out of their hometown or home region for college. So we certainly have an eye on that. The university system is working quite closely with the Office of Public Instruction in order to be as flexible as possible. For example, you may have noticed in the last day or so an announcement that testing is being postponed. The college entrance / statewide assessment exam, the ACT, will now be offered free to all Montana seniors this fall instead of this spring. Our university system is going to adapt all of our scholarship competitions, our admissions processes in order to account for that later date. And again, pure speculation, but we're thinking about ways to adopt some more flexibility in our admissions approach so that we can accommodate students who've had an interruption to their high school academic experience. But we've got our eye on the ball here. It's obviously an important challenge for us to address. We want to make sure that we offer the right kind of support to high school seniors who are thinking about moving on to studying in the Montana University system. Thank you.
Any other questions for the Deputy Commissioners? Very well. We'll move on to an update from the Office of Public Instruction. Dylan Clapmeyer, has Superintendent Arnson joined this call?
I'm not sure. Superintendent, are you on the line? I know she was driving this morning, so she may not have had service, but we're prepared to update if she's not on the phone.
It sounds like she doesn't have service, so Dylan, if you go ahead and take it from here.
Of course, I'll provide a quick update on the federal end and what OPI has been doing, and then just to let everyone know, the specialists that we have on the line are Kara Flatt with Finance, Tracy Mosman with Health and Safety, Julie Merkel with ESSA and Federal Programs, and Ashley McGrath, our State Assessment Director. If anyone has questions from those folks. But this is Dylan Clapmeyer, I'm the Communications Director for OPI. I had conversations yesterday in the afternoon with our congressional staff, and the consensus I got was that this $2 trillion stimulus package that the Senate passed will probably not be changed much in the House, and they were supposed to vote on it this morning. As everyone in the committee knows, the House did not vote on that this morning. The Speaker is still saying that they will be voting on it today. But we're still kind of in watch and wait mode on what the federal government is going to provide. I did get some information from Senator Daines' office about what the bill has in it that Montana schools could benefit from, and some information from our National Superintendents Organization. So there is $13.5 billion allocated K-12 education, some of that going to the Bureau of Indian Education, some of it going to state education agencies, but the vast majority, 90% of it, is going to local education agencies, local school districts, and it would be allocated into their Title I formulas for distribution. Outside of that, Senator Daines' office sent me that the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund projects that Montana would get about $8.5 million for distribution to K-12 schools and higher education institutions. The Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, which OPI would distribute to local education agencies through Title I, is projected to get about $41 million. So that's a pretty huge chunk. And then the Project Serve is a competitive grant application that Montana schools might be able to receive. And the amount that's in there nationally is $100 million. And I apologize, I've been on speakerphone. Let me take myself off speaker so people can hear me better. Beyond that, OPI, I'm just going to give an overview of what OPI has been doing in the last couple of weeks. We've had 5 conference calls with Montana's local district superintendents and county superintendents to update them every time the governor comes out with a new announcement. The governor's stay-at-home order yesterday does not impact what schools were already doing. The previous directives that schools were operating under still stand. And so over half of our schools have already submitted plans to the governor's office for how they'll be offering alternative education and nutrition services, and schools will continue operating under those plans that they've submitted to the governor's office. The order yesterday does not change any of that. But we created an online course for teachers on the Learning Hub with best practices for alternative education services, and that launched on Monday, and on the first day we had over 600 educators sign up, so that's fantastic. We've created a new web page that's updated, if not hourly, then at least daily, And so if you go to opi.mt.gov, you'll see the COVID-19 webpage with updates there. We've been applying for waivers through the governor's office and the federal government. Ashley or Julie will touch on the assessment one a little bit more. But essentially, we've been seeking waivers from standardized assessments. We've received waivers from the USDA to allow flexibility in serving school meals. We've received from the governor's office at our request waivers from instruction hours so that schools can offer proficiency-based alternative learning. And we've received waivers for transportation services so that school buses can be used to distribute education materials and nutrition services. So I think that's all I have at this point. If any of the committee members have any questions for me before, if Pat would like, I'm happy to turn it over to the specialist, like I said, that we have on the phone.
This is Representative Beatty. I have one question for you, or one request for you, Dylan. Sure. And you laid out a series of federal funding programs beyond the $13.5 billion program that is associated with the stimulus bill. If after this meeting, if you could provide a one-page summary of those various funding programs to Pat, so that we could post a summary of that on our website.
Of course, happy to.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Flatmeyer?
Mr. Chair, Mossy Funk.
Representative Funk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that request. That's very helpful. I was just wondering if we have any. My understanding is you don't know exactly how these funds are going to be allocated, but my understanding is that there are also some discretionary funds that will be coming in for the governor to use for education. If you could address that, any kind of figures that you have about what the approximate value amounts that Montana might be getting, and how much of it will go directly to the schools, how much is discretionary, and then how much is discretionary, and will OPI allocate, or this will all be as with the higher ed, the funds that are coming in? Deputy Commissioner Kessler spoke about the ones that will already be allocated, or does OPI do the allocation? Does that make sense?
It does, of course, Representative. Thanks for the question. So the vast majority of these federal funds that Congress is considering are going to go to Title I programs within Montana's schools, about 90% of it. So the current projections are that Montana will receive about $41 million that OPI will allocate to local school districts based on our existing Title I formulas. So OPI will technically distribute those funds, but they will be allocated through our long-standing Title I formulas that will go directly to schools. The discretionary funds that we look like we might have access to, and at this point I'm not certain how they're going to be distributed, but that would be the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, and that is projected to be about $8.5 million. And that, I'm just trying to read what I've received.
Sorry, excuse me, Mr. Chair, but if you could repeat that last one, the
Governor's Emergency Relief Fund is about $8.5 million, and I'm not quite certain at this point how that is going to be allocated. That will likely come through OPI to go to LEAs, but some of it will also go to higher ed, post-secondary. So that $8.5 million, I have to find out more about how that is allocated. But Montana schools can have confidence that they will be receiving a bump in their Title I funds, because that's the vast majority of the funding that Montana is going to get, and that's that $41 million.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions from the committee?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Senator Campbell.
Senator Campbell.
Yes, Mr. Chair. It was mentioned that the schools are going to all operate the same as what they have under previous order. Is that information going to get out there? Because I've had some calls that what's going to happen now with the school, and I'd like to see that information get out there as soon as possible.
Of course, Representative, Mr. Chair. So last night at about 7 o'clock, I sent out the information to county superintendents, district superintendents, and I believe I blind CC'd legislators on it as well, so hopefully you have that in your mailbox. But that information did get out last night.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions from the committee? I do have one other question, and after hearing the discussion of the federal stimulus money, it's clear that it comes in three different packages, and I just want to make sure I have the numbers right. This is a $30.75 billion education stabilization fund nationwide, and if I understand it correctly, $41 million are going into Montana for elementary and secondary education. $8.5 million are going to the governor for the governor's discretion, and that can go either to K-12 education or to higher education. And the higher education, I believe the number is $26 million coming to Montana. I'll first ask Mr. Clapmeyer, do I have it right for elementary and secondary education and for the governor's portion?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
And then a question then to Mr. Trevor. Is the $26 million correct for the higher education portion?
Mr. Chair, Tyler Trevor here. It's $26 million for the Montana University system, and then $1.4 million for the community colleges, and $1.6 million for tribal colleges. So I would adjust that to $29 million.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from Mr. Clapmeyer?
Mr. Chair, this is Representative Luke.
Representative Jones?
Mr. Chair, I guess more of a comment than a question that needs to be added to this. The numbers in education that were listed out there seem accurate to me. There is another potential that has yet to be fleshed out that folks are working on. Each state is to receive $1.25 billion. I believe it's split 55%. But again, this is still being worked through, so this is going to be a nebulous statement. I believe the split is 55% is distributed through state government, 45% goes to local government. I do believe schools are going to meet the definition of local government. There's lots of questions with this $1.25 billion yet as to what portion of it can be distributed by the governor, what portion may indeed require legislative input. But as for now, that would probably be, if you take 45% of $1.25 billion, and you assume counties and cities and schools would be the participant, maybe because schools have other sources, they'd be smaller. But that will indeed be a factor once it gets clarified as to the rules with that particular block. That's more of a comment, I guess, than a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Jones. Representative Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The discussion and the wrap-up has again caused me a little bit of confusion. So for Mr. Clapmeyer, the $41 million to OPI, I believe that you stated it was primarily for Title I schools. So can you define primarily for us?
Correct. Chair, Representative Benton. So the $41 million that goes to Title I, the vast majority of Montana schools meet the eligibility for Title I, and that is the largest federal program to support schools. It goes to schools that meet the definition of economically disadvantaged, and about 90% of Montana schools meet that definition and receive those Title I funds. So there is a percentage, about 10% of schools, that might not receive that Title I bump, but there are other areas of funding and support that we hope that we can get to all schools.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Senator Solomon.
Yeah, I have an ESSA question. Do you want me to ask it now?
What kind of question, please?
ESSA.
Please ask it.
Okay. The question I have is, we've got the waiver to not have, or Mr. Chairman, we have the waiver to not have the testing this spring. Are they going to delay it for a year, or are they going to delay it till next fall? Because everybody kind of, the question has come up. I have no answer. So just ask.
Thank you, Senator and Mr. Chair. So the required standardized assessments will not be done this spring, and they will not be made up next fall. Essentially, they will just be canceled for this year, with the exception of the ACT. I believe the Deputy Commissioner at Ochi touched on this, but the ACT not only serves as Montana's standardized exam for high school students, it's also a major factor in college admissions. And so the OPI and Montana University system worked out an agreement earlier this week with the ACT to offer the ACT this fall for high school students that want to take it free of charge. They will be able to do that at school.
Thank you. I have one other question, Representative.
Senator Solomon, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Some people are asking, especially for elementary, high school, etc., when's the drop dead date that they won't have to go back to school? So if they decide that everything's okay end of April or at some point, are they still going to make the schools open and the kids go back for a couple of weeks? Or have they started talking about at what date do they not want to mess up what they've got going? And I'm just curious about that. I've asked the governor's office. Nobody has really got down that road yet. But people are wondering because kids have to restaff, you have to do all the things and bring the kids back so they really learn anything. Those questions are out there, so I'll just put it out here to these guys.
Sure, Senator, Mr. Chair. That is completely up to the governor's office under the emergency declaration that he has made. That would be the governor's call. Superintendent Arnson, has said that we want to provide consistency for schools and transparency so that they can plan. Unfortunately, I just don't have that information at this point. The superintendent has also, said that when school doors open back up, learning might look different because of this experience that we've had. But of course, we're encouraging the governor's office to provide as much advance notice and clarity to schools as they can, knowing that we're all operating under the best advice from health officials.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Sue Vinton again.
Representative Vinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for the multiple questions. I've had some requests from a number of different directions for information regarding transportation funds as it relates to paying for school bus drivers, mechanics, whatever. Is there anyone that can address that? And my understanding is that transportation is included in schools' budgets already, so I guess I'm not understanding why school transportation funds would still not be going as they should have been allocated before the shutdown. Can anyone illuminate that for me?
Yes, thank you, Representative and Mr. Chair. Actually, this is a good opportunity for me to hand the phone over to our school transportation and finance experts, and I want to respect the committee's time, so I'll leave it up to the discretion of the chair if the chair would like our assessment director and health and safety director to go through any updates they have, but that offer is out there. But at this time, I'm going to hand the phone over to Kara to discuss the updates on transportation, the waivers. So, Kara, the question relates to how funding is flowing at the state and county level for transportation under these waivers. So here's Kara.
Hi, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Kara Flack, School Finance Administrator. And yes, I'll provide a quick update, and if I miss anything, please feel free to ask me questions. But the state is paying pupil transportation as if the districts were operating as normal. So what we told districts, and normally you claim your actual days that you're completing transportation, but we're saying we're going to pay based on your scheduled school calendar days. So, most average is, 90 days a semester. So we'll pay them with the existing bus routes, existing individual transportation contracts like they were operating normally. We won't allow a lot of changes. We won't allow a lot of changes to individual contracts, but then we'll make that payment and hope. And then the funding that the districts get in replacement of that has opened some allowances for paying for other items related to allowing remote learning. So that includes, transportation of food, providing access for students to work on their schoolwork remotely, and some of those items. But at this point, we're waiting for clarification on whether or not counties are required to pay their end, but we are strongly encouraging that counties are funded to pay for transportation costs like the state is, and so we'd hope they'd honor that obligation in a similar fashion. And on our OPI COVID-19 page, we have a fact document, a frequently asked questions document for transportation. If there's more information that you're curious about or later decide you want to read it, it's out there for basic questions that we've received a lot of. So that is kind of a quick and fast explanation, and I hope that answers it.
Hi, Chair Beatty. This is Mafi Funk. Chair Beatty.
Representative Funk, go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead, Representative Funk. I was muted.
No problem. Thank you so much. I think this is from Representative Woods, who's not able to access the call, but he's listening to us. And as you probably know, Bozeman is not paying for transportation. And if it's in their budget, it seems like they should be honoring the contract. So we're wondering, is there anything that we might do to... I understand that you're working with it. You encourage the local districts to honor those contracts. But is there anything we can do when a district, and most districts are, but when a district is not honoring the contract, particularly when it is in the budget, so the funds are ostensibly there? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, Representative Funk, we have talked with that district over there, and we can't force the school district to make the decisions. Their Board of Trustees has made a decision not to pay that contractor because they aren't operating any routes. It's up to the district and the Board of Trustees what they will pay and what they're going to do with the monies they receive from the state. And the only other thing to think about is the district is providing remote services to some of their students, and I'm not sure if they're taking the funding that they're getting from the state and county and moving it there, or what they're doing with their money in replacement of that. I would defer to the district, but the state cannot direct the schools to pay that money because the Board of Trustees makes that decision.
Thank you. Quick follow-up, Chair. Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Representative Funk.
Yes. Well, thank you. Just to clarify, even though this money is given for transportation, local school boards have the option to use it for other. It's more like a general fund money rather than even though it is designated as transportation, it can be used in general fund.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Funk, no, it still has a sandbox around it, but the transportation fund can include it's kind of changed now that the students are working remotely or learning remotely. So what we've provided in our guidance is they can take the transportation fund, and allowable expenses would include the cost of providing the nutritional programs, not the food itself, but transporting food, accessibility for remote learning and instructional materials. Some are looking at internet services for students who do not have internet, and any cost of providing services to students with IEP, or some of them still have staff paying out of the transportation fund who are taking leave. It's a little broader now that students are working remotely to provide, it's anything to get the materials and items to the students to learn remotely.
Thank you.
So
Thank
that
you,
would be
Mr.
at a
Chair.
local,
Mr. Chair, Jones, please. Representative Grubbs.
Mr. Chair, just a comment after Representative Funk's comments. I'm going to be making a call right after the meeting because I have the same question, and I'll find out more information about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question on the quote-unquote sandbox around transportation. Transportation is levied on your taxes, so it comes in a pretty strict sandbox. When we say we loosen, it normally is pretty difficult to do anything beyond that sandbox. When we say we loosened the rules of the sandbox, was that with an emergency declaration? How were the rules loosened, and where can we see by what authority and what the loosening was?
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, Representative Jones, yes, that's a good clarification. I shouldn't say it's still the things that are allowable in the transportation fund are still what is allowed in statute, but under remote learning, there's a clause where anything related to the cost of providing correspondence courses or individualized remote learning is included in there and has always been included, but the landscape of learning changed when it all went remotely, so the cost for districts shifted on how do we provide educational services remotely, where before it was on a case-by-case basis and probably not, it wasn't widely used, right? So it's still the same guidelines, it's just the changes to provide that remote learning has changed the landscape just temporarily while there's this opening. But in fairness, this is existing statute, it's existing law, and what's already in the transportation fund just hasn't been used like that before because most of it was for bus transportation services,
And Mr. Chairman, yes, it's usually been fairly strictly held and not allowed this. I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be used for this in this emergency. That's not my intent here. My intent is we need to probably clarify this extension. Otherwise, it could potentially become something that people assume can happen all the time. And since this is a fund that can generate its own permissive levies, that this stuff there's a sandbox there for a reason. This certainly seems like a valuable reason to extend the sandbox, but we need to be clear what extensions are allowed, why they're allowed, and while additional flexibility may be required today, that needs to be a discussion, especially if we're going to permissively levy folks in the future.
This is Representative Beatty. I have another data request for Dylan, and that is, Dylan, if after this meeting, if you could provide legislative staff the one-pager on this the sandbox, what existing statutes and rules govern that sandbox, and the current interpretation of how those rules can be loosened, so that we can post that on our website and the committee can be fully informed.
Yes, of course, Representative, and Mr. Chair, we will get that to you.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee or comments? Mr. Klopmeyer, I don't think it's necessary for you to have updates provided by your staff unless you think that there is something that has changed radically since last Thursday when we spoke. Rather, we'll have your specialists respond to questions as they come up from the committee. So right now, I guess I'm opening it up for the committee for any questions for OPI, whether it be transportation, nutrition, delivery of special education services, etc.
Lou Joe has left the meeting.
Okay, are there any questions or comments?
May I have Chair Beatty? This is Rafi Funk again.
Representative Funk.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for all this really helpful information. The one, I was just wondering if we could get some updates on how MSDB is doing in this. They obviously have some very unique challenges. I understand they're doing an awesome job, but if you could just provide us after the meeting with some information on how they're doing, if there's anything we can do, or if everything is going pretty well, if you would do that. Thank you.
Pat, if you would follow up on that question and get the information together for Representative Funk.
Yes, will do, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions or comments? I have one question then. This actually relates to higher education. And just a quick summary, if it's available, how are the community colleges doing? Are their operations sort of mimicking what's going on in the MUS? I think this is
Mr. Chair, Tyler Trevor here.
Yes.
Yep. This is Tyler Trevor. Yep. We are in close contact with the community colleges. We provide them with detailed updates on our directives to the campuses, and by and large, yes, they are following in concert with the applicable directives.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments before this meeting adjourns? Hearing none.
Yes.
Representative Anderson, go ahead.
Senator McClafferty.
Yes. Senator McClafferty, please.
Has left the meeting.
Representative Beatty, Chairman Beatty, this is Representative Vicini. I do have one question.
Yes.
I was wondering about the projection. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do not know to whom to address this, but I'm wondering about projection for revenue. Since revenue is a huge tie to education, the projection for revenue, and then also another question, is there any information about relaxing the timelines for the payment of taxes for small businesses, or what is the information that we have here? Any information forthcoming from sources that can help us with this?
Representative McCamey, this is somewhat off the topics we were discussing on the agenda. I have not been following closely the overall financial forecast. Some of my colleagues may have. If Representative Jones is still on the line, I'm sure he has. My understanding is revenue forecast is, had been, and I may be wrong on this, but my understanding is that we were going to, it had been projected to be above estimated revenue. And now it looks as though we'll hit the legislature's revenue estimate because of the contraction of the economy. I do realize that looking at the long-term fiscal impact and revenue impact is under consideration now, but I do not, to my knowledge, I do not think we're in a position to talk definitively about that yet.
Carly Boland
has left the meeting.
Have we received any word about the relaxation of taxes?
I have not. This is Representative Beatty. If any member of our staff can weigh in on this, it would be fine. But I am not aware of that. But I have been focusing on this particular segment of our oversight in the government, the education. So we'll have to see. That'll have to be left to another date unless someone has an answer on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your indulgence in this kind of sidebar, but still it does directly affect education, so I appreciate your indulgence. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? Well, I think this has been a useful meeting. I wish to thank staff and representatives from the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education and from the Office of Public Instruction. I think you gave us great information. I realize that this is a fluid time, that there are still much to be determined. The stimulus package is just being passed now, so I recognize it'll take a little bit of time to digest that and figure out what the rules of the game are so we can get the funding out as necessary. I know that there are other matters that have to do with keeping our businesses afloat, as Representative McCamey alluded to. I mean, clearly we need to get our economy back online so that the state revenues will continue flowing. Representative Anderson and I will be in consultation with staff over the next several days, and as the situation clarifies itself a bit, we will almost certainly be arranging another joint meeting of the Education Interim Committee and the Legislative Finance Committee Subcommittee on Education. The date to be determined, but I would expect it to occur within the next week to 10 days. Watch your emails.
If you can hear us, we have lost the call, so please adjourn the meeting, Representative Beatty.